Hello students, welcome to The Analyst, dated 17th of July 2023. We'll look at all the important articles from the Indian Express and the Hindu. Now before we go ahead, it is my humble request to all of you that please go through the description of each of these videos because there is a handout and you can use the handout in two ways. Either you can get a printout and you can jot down whatever is being spoken in the lecture. Alternatively, you can directly open the PDF on, let's say, a tablet or an iPad and jot down with your pen, right, while watching the video. Now, let's look at the table of contents for today. So, we'll be looking at defamation and a related issue. This relates to the defamation issue of Rahul Gandhi and then the disqualification that followed. Then we look at Prime Minister's France visit. Further, we look at how India is shifting towards electric vehicle and what is the future of this transition. Then we'll take up a small case study of Collegium transparency, given that the appointment of judges has been in news lately. Then we'll look at a war exercise called Nomadic Elephant. So let's start with the first article. The first article is regarding defamation. Now, it is very pertinent to understand that it takes years, it takes decades to build one's reputation. And what do we mean by reputation? So, it is the sum total of the social capital. So, let's say I have a perception of myself, but then the world has a perception of my personality. So, what the world cumulatively has is the reputation. Now, it takes decades to build your reputation. And what happens is your reputation is the shadow of your personality. It is somehow interpolated outwards. And if somehow your reputation is disparaged, it is denigrated, it is degraded, then what happens? Your life is also affected. That means your right to life, your personal liberties are also affected. Therefore, reputation is fundamental to the fundamental right of Article 21. And if someone tries to damage your reputation through words spoken, let's say articles written, through sign, through acting, or through any other mode of your freedom of speech and expression, that will be considered as defamation. Now, it can be either civil or it can be criminal. So there are two types of defamation in India. Let's say there is a civil defamation suit. So what happens? I tend to get some monetary compensation. So let's say a company is affected by statements of a competitor. So they will go for a civil suit. They might settle it out of the court on the basis of, let's say, a few $1 million. On the other hand, let's say the case itself, the issue is about criminal defamation, then the case itself will be taken up by the state. So whenever there is a crime, the state will file the suit against a person. Let's say the state of West Bengal versus person X. So if the person X has gone for defamation against a public functionary, etc. So two types of defamation. Now this has to be seen in light of Article 19(1)(a). So 19(1)(a) is your fundamental right. And these fundamental rights, as we have seen, that 19(1)(a) in itself is a gamut of rights. The Supreme Court has read many rights into Article 19(1)(a). Rights like freedom of speech, rights like freedom of press, rights like right to remain silent. So we have seen the case laws like Indianexpress, Sakal Press, then Bennett Coleman, then the right to remain silent in Bejoy Emanuel. Simultaneously, when we do a cursory reading of Article 19(2), we see that these are reasonable restrictions. One of those restrictions is defamation. Therefore, while I have the liberties to speak, but there are limitations that my speech, my acts should not at any point of time disrepute you or denigrate your overall standing, your overall social capital in the society. And what are these sections? So section 499 and section 500 of the IPC. Now, what are the arguments against defamation? So it is said that defamation has a colonial mindset because defamation is usually used by the elite, by the intelligentsia, by the people who are in power or who have deep pockets, because the ordinary man is usually not defamated or does not have the capacity, whether financial or knowledge wise, to approach a court for defamation. On the other hand, we see that people in high position, in high echelons of life, they would usually go for defamation suits and they will ask for big recoveries of money. For example, a defamation suit for 2 crores, 5 crores, like that. So the basis is that usually criminal defamation is being abused, misused to stifle free speech. And how do we use defamatory laws of defamation? So we are basically filing suits against, let's say, journalists who are critical to us, who are, let's say, going for some pungent and scathing criticism of the government, or let's say some protesters, maybe some people who are associated with NGOs, etc. So we are going for defamation suits. Finally, the world is moving towards decriminalizing such laws in general, laws which gives extraordinary authority or power with the state. So our neighbor Sri Lanka has decriminalized it. US, UK has done the same. So while all the countries have maintained defamation as a civil wrong, they have removed the criminal aspects. So decriminalization of defamation. Now, 2 important case laws that we can relate to it, that we can add as fodder points. First one is Subramaniam Swamy versus Union of India 2016. Here, the court, Mr. Subramanian Swamy, Dr. Subramanian Swamy went to the court and challenged the constitutionality of criminal defamation itself. But the court held that criminal defamation is part of reasonable restriction. Why? Because it fulfills the doctrine of proportionality. That means it is not improportional. It is not against the proportions to say so. And what do I mean by proportions? So let's say I do a wrong and so there is a follow-up punishment. So the wrong and the punishment, they are proportional. They are not disproportional. Furthermore, the court clearly affirmed that the right to reputation is part of right to life under Article 21. That is the wisdom that we can draw from here. That reputation is fundamental to everyone's personality and their own life and liberty. And why? Because in Menka Gandhi, it said that right to life does not mean mere animal existence. It entails the full potential to enlarge all your horizons, to achieve your true potentials. That is right to life for us. Then in Ram Jethmalani versus Subramanian Swamy, the court held that there is a difference between fair criticism and defamation. And criticism is not defamation unless it is made with the intent to harm the reputation. So in defamation, the intent matters a lot. Let's say I am bringing to notice some facts which are of public importance, which are of national importance. Then I cannot be held liable. Then if I am criticizing the government, then I cannot be held liable. However, if I am criticizing, let's say, a minister, and my target is not a policy, but it is the person. So I am not concerned about the government or the ministry or their working, but I am directly attacking him personally. So that can be labeled as defamation. So my intent matters in defamation cases. What are the way forward? So like other democracies have done, we can amend our laws, we can repeal some sections. Secondly, issues like this should become a civil wrong and they can be settled out of court, given that we have high pendency, and we can adopt amicable dispute resolution using alternate dispute resolutions and EADRs. Furthermore, in any law which has the potentialities of misuse, abuse or overuse, we can always set the 4 boundaries. So these boundaries are very essential. The limits of a law should be set so it can be objectively identified whether a particular case is falling under the criteria of defamation or not. Further, it is must that whenever such provisions of law are used, overly used, misused or abused by any person, whether high or low, whenever it is abused, the abuse of law should also be punished. Now, a second related issue is regarding the conviction. So, what happens is the member of parliament was convicted for 2 years. Now, if you're convicted for 2 or more years, you naturally lose out your membership of the parliament. Why? Because you are disqualified. So, what entails disqualification and from where are we deriving the powers, authority of disqualification? So, there are 2 primary sources, or I can say 3 primary sources. One is under Article 102. So, Article 102(1). So, we say that 102 clause 1. Then 1022 and our Representation of People's Act. Then there is our anti-defection laws. So, 1022 talks about disqualified under 10th schedule. So, 1011, 1022 and we are looking at Representation of People's Act 1951. So, 3 places where we find the use of word disqualification. Now, there are several criteria for disqualification. We'll see in the next slide. But what is important in this particular case is the moment you are disqualified, the moment you are convicted for 2 or more years, you are disqualified to become a member of parliament. And this disqualification is for the period of imprisonment. Let's say you are imprisoned for 3 years. So 3 plus 6 years. That means 9 years you cannot fight an election. Right? Now, in the backdrop, we also have to understand that in India, we face the issue of criminalization of politics, politicization of criminals. We face the issue of use of wealth, use of money power, muscle power in our elections. We have reformed and transformed a lot, yet muscle and money power still remains. And it is also a breeding ground for political corruption. So, looking at those aspects, 3 plus 6, it is a extraordinary kind of punishment for a politician. And let's say I am a tarnished politician and being out of power for 9 years, that is extraordinary. So there were some riders and these riders were under section 8(4). So clause 4 of section 8 of which act? Representation of People's Act 1951. So deriving the powers from the constitution, we created 2 election related laws. One was Representation of People's Act 1950 and one was 51. In 51 only we are talking about disqualification. So these 2 riders became very critical. One is the period of 3 months from date of conviction to appeal. So breather period was given. So let's say I am convicted today. So I will not lose my membership today itself. So I will get a 3-month breather so that I can file an appeal. And we use the famous analogy of tariq pe tariq. What do I mean? That I will move from one court to another, right? I'll file appeal after appeal, right? I'll go from one stage of judiciary to other stage. Why? Because I want to stall the process. I want to delay the process. So, can I stall it in India? Yes, we can. So, period of 3 months, I get to appeal. So, let's say now I have filed my appeal. Then I want to stall it as long as possible. Why? Because the second part says that disqualification will not be applicable. That any disqualification whatsoever, even if you are convicted, will not be applicable until the appeal is decided. So, until the final decision will be done, I'll be out, roaming, fighting elections, winning election after election. Why? Because I have both muscle and money, right? And so, will it not lead to more criminalization of politics? And in fact, entrenchment of any criminal element So the elements will become bigger in size, in status, in terms of their political mileage as well. So what happened was a transformation, or you can say it was a revolution on part of the Supreme Court. So what happened in Lily Thomas is Section 8, Clause 4 was struck down. And what was the result? The result was that the moment I am convicted for 2 or more years, I will lose out my legislative seat. I will not be a member of parliament anymore. With immediate effect, I will lose it. Right. So what happened is that the legislator in this particular case, he was issued a letter from the Lok Sabha Secretariat of removal, of disqualification as a member of parliament because he was convicted. But some commentators have raised some pertinent issues, and one of those issues is that whenever we look at Article 103, Article 103, let's read it out. So, if any decision arises as to whether a member of either House of Parliament has become subject to any disqualification mentioned in Clause 1 of 102, the question shall be referred to the decision of the President, and his decision should be final. But Clause 2 says, before giving any decision or any such question, the President shall obtain the opinion of Election Commission and shall act according to such opinion. Now, what happened is that in this case, the letter came from Lok Sabha Secretariat rather than the President himself. And so, this is a minor issue that has been pointed out by few commentators. Now, what is the way forward? So, way forward is that we must appreciate the wisdom of Lily Thomas. That why do we want immediate disqualification? Immediate disqualification, why? Because once there is conviction, there is some criminal element present within our political system, then they should not be part of the parliament itself, and that should be of immediate effect. So that is one wisdom, that we have to move towards more cleaner, more ethical governance and ethical political system. Second is that the disqualification powers vested with the President under Article 103 cannot be usurped. Usurped means I cannot illegally take away your authority. So we cannot usurp the power of the President, and the Lok Sabha Secretariat for sure cannot take away the powers of the President. Right. Now, let's look at the third topic. So this relates to the recent visit of Prime Minister Narendra Modi to France, and he was on a 2-day visit. Now, this was a momentous occasion because it was the 25 years, we were celebrating the 25 years of our strategic partnership with France. And our Prime Minister was bestowed with the highest civilian honor on the Bastille Day. And there was unprecedented protocol, warmth in welcome, and the idea was strategic vision and global goals. So one thing came out, that the idea is not to focus on minute or smaller details, but to go for global goals because of global partnership. Now let's look at some context, some backdrop, some background that was going on. So a few days back, we have seen that there were riots in France, and this was because an Algerian teenager was shot dead. So that was an internal issue of France. Parallelly, we are seeing that a lot of our consulates, a lot of our embassies are being attacked by protesters. And this is happening in the West, let's say Canada, US, UK, Australia. So across these countries, these protesters are directly attacking our symbols of India, like the national flag, like our emblem, etc. And that is unfortunate. Parallelly, we see that there is some preaching going on from the West, whether it is the preaching of democratic values, whether it is the preaching of, let's say, civil liberties, let's say, talk about some religious freedoms, secularism. So there is this mentality, colonial mentality, some legacy, that holier than thou attitude, that they want to preach us what is democracy, what is civil liberties, what is freedom of press, etc. And this is done through, let's say, fronts or other NGOs or organizations, or let's say some public debates, or some commentators, or some commentary done by, let's say, some senators, or let's say attacks on our conglomerates. So these things have been going on parallelly. And whether or not we appreciate that these are internal matters, but a lot of countries are trying to meddle in these issues. But what do we see is different with France? So France was looking at rights. We have some internal issues. But France has never pinpointed or taught us or lectured us on these principles. It has always appreciated our strategic autonomy. And when we look at the abrogation of Article 370, then also as a member of UNSC, France has been vociferous to support India, and it has blocked a lot of discussions on issues which are of national importance to India. So while China will continuously block our actions against Pakistan in UNSC, similarly, France has been a constant support in blocking any action or any statement that is trying to be issued by China. So we have to appreciate that this shows the maturity of these 25 years of strategic partnership. And that is why, even though we have more than 25 odd strategic partnership agreements, but this is a full spectrum strategic partnership agreement. Why? Because we are talking from space to defense to aerospace. We are also talking about medicine. We are also talking about people to people. And we are also showing actionable results. Now, the broader principle says that there must be some cooperation across fora and regions. So we cannot be isolated to Europe. We cannot be isolated to only South Asia. And therefore, larger strategic alignment along Indo-Pacific on larger issues. Issues like climate change, climate finance, technology transfer, defense cooperation, space agreements. Then respecting each other's strategic autonomy, respecting each other's internal matters. Then France always refuses to comment on India's internal issues. Do we not notice that the world has taught us not to buy Russian oil? We wanted to buy it for our own energy needs, for containing the inflation, for getting oil at cheaper prices. But we were being lectured to change our stance of, let's say, buying Russian oil, or to change our stance on the Russia-Ukraine issue, to take sides. But France never taught us such, never gave us such lectures. So even though it is part of the West, but there is more alignment that we are seeing. And multiple commentators have pointed out that today itself we are trying to align with France like we aligned with Moscow at a particular point of time. And why these debates are important? Because we see that we were very close to Russia, but now Russia is extremely close to China, and China is at our back doors. It is there in Galwan. It is there all along the borders. It is trying to encircle India through one belt, one road, through string of pearls. It is also fueling indirectly the terrorism in Pakistan through the China-Pakistan economic corridor. So how can we completely align with Russia when Russia is very good friends with China? Parallelly, what do we see? That recently our Prime Minister also visited the US. So we had gamut of agreements signed thereof, including technology transfer, including defense cooperation. But again, the lecturing of free speech, democracy, civil liberties, civil society, action on civil society, then lobbying to let's say, lobbying for the FANG companies, lobbying for Amazon, etc., so that the IT rules can be diluted, so that in the data protection acts, etc., these dilutions can come in. So somehow, as the boss of the West, US always tries to have a bargaining chip against India, and it always tries to meddle into India's internal affairs. And that is why the strategic think tanks, the policy think tanks, they are wary of American interest, and they cannot 100% rely on America's behavior. Therefore, while we cannot be very good friends with Moscow, because we are now moving towards West, we have had a calibration along the West. We have pivoted ourselves as a country which has good relations with all sides of the aisle. So India cannot pick and choose sides. It maintains its strategic autonomy. Yet, in terms of these agreements, it is quite visible that Paris has replaced Moscow in India's strategic calculus. And this is also in France's own interest. Why? Because it is also not collaborating in, let's say, Quad or AUKUS. So they issued something called as a Horizon 2047. So in the key takeaways, we see that the next 25 years of strategic partnership is now being planned. And there are three important pillars to this Horizon 2047. One is defending security and sovereignty. The second is deepening cooperation on global issue. And the third is people-to-people relationship. So more people to go to France for further studies, right? And more balanced, more attractive post-work visas. Then cooperating on global issues. What are these global issues? So the goals of climate change, the Paris Agreement, how it will go forward, and the COP26 in Glasgow. How will the INDCs take place? Where will the finance come from? Where will the technology come from? So all those global issues. So how will we go for energy transitions? Then in security. So in security, what we have done is we have gone for the HAL Safran deal. This is for the multi-role helicopter. Then we have also gone for 26 off-the-shelf Rafale jets. This is for the Indian Navy. Then a further order to make in India of 3 Scorpion submarines in our flagship Mazgaon dock. So you can see that along with technology, along with joint ventures, along with co-production, co-development, we are aligning ourselves also in the Indo-Pacific. So regions, forums, technologies, space, defense. So it is a full spectrum relationship. Now, where can we work more? We can work more on aspects of trade and how TRIPS, how a free trade agreement, etc. has not been possible because of the delay in terms of negotiation between EU and India of a free trade agreement. Now, let's look at the next article, and this is regarding the shift towards electric vehicles. So, why do we need such a shift? So, in COP26 Glasgow, what did we say? We said net zero emissions by 2070. The world promised by 2047, 2050. But given that we also require our fair share, we need the fair share of time, of space to develop ourselves also, because we are an emerging market economy. And while the developed countries, they have emitted their share of carbon, there is now continuous lecturing on the developing and emerging market economies to cut down on their fossil fuel emissions and their carbon emissions. Yet, we are sensitive enough for the earth. We appreciate the sustainability aspects of earth, and that is part of our culture. And therefore, we have gone for net zero emissions by 2070. Secondly, we will lower our emission intensity by 45% by 2030, and this is based upon the 2005 levels. Now, let's take up some statistics and then we'll try to analyze the electric vehicle, how we are transitioning. And to say very simply, we are replacing a IC engine. IC engines are used in petrol engines. Then we have compression ignition engines. These are used in diesel vehicles. So we are replacing both of these with, let's say, an electric motor and a set of batteries. And we are also removing all fuel aspects of components. So let's say your fuel storage, your fuel supply, injectors, all of those things are going away. And the biggest benefit is that these are zero emission cars. These are zero emission vehicles. Now, let's look at the statistics of the promise of this industry. So, Niti Aayog, our policy think tank, it says that 80% of two-wheelers and three-wheelers will be electric by 2030. Then 40% of buses. Now, these stats are for all India, but some states are targeting 100%, like Delhi is targeting 100% of bus fleet. Then 30% of cars in India will be EV, and this is till 2030. And we must also appreciate that India is the third largest automobile manufacturer of the world. And we'll do a case study on the automobile sector of India at some point of time. But we must be proud of this feat. Third largest automobile. And we are a substantial exporter of not only cars but also bikes, scooties, as well as electric vehicles. So, another point that our Ministry of Surface Transport or Road Transport says that there has been 300% bump, 300% increase on year basis in the sales. Furthermore, the sales have touched the 1 million mark. So 10 lakh EVs have already gone on to the roads. What economic survey says? So economic survey says that between 2022 to 2030, we will have almost 50% of growth every year. 50%, that is phenomenal growth. Then we will reach annual sales of 1 crore by 2030. 1 crore vehicle being sold year on year by 2030. And cumulatively, this industry alone will be worth more than $200 billion. Now, what are the benefits? So let's look at greenhouse gases. So whether it is NOx, SOx, whether it is particulate matter, whether it is carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, there are no emissions whatsoever. So zero emission cars. So one issue of pollution, let's say in a city like Delhi, that can be sorted out because the vehicular pollution will be zero. Second aspect is energy security. Now, we are always talking about an energy mix, and we are talking about a healthy balance between, let's say, fossil fueled energy and, let's say, renewable energy. So we are moving towards cleaner, greener transition because we have to abide by our own goals, which were declared in form of Panchamrit by our Prime Minister himself. So when we are talking about energy security, we have to consider 2 points. One is that we are import dependent. More than $100 billion of imports. And this leads to a lot of fluctuations in our inflation cycle. And it also affects our cost of logistics. How things are purchased, sold, how they are transported. Everything is being affected by oil prices. And oil prices themselves are dependent upon a lot of geopolitical phenomena. Let's say a small conflict breaks out tomorrow somewhere in the world and this small country turns out to be Venezuela. Then what would happen? Again, another problem in the supply chain of oil. So, furthermore, there are cartels also, OPEC, OPEC plus, and this is basically politicization of resources because energy is being used as a weapon in the ongoing wars. That tells us that we should be Atmanirbhar in energy security, in Amrit Kal. And therefore, we have to move towards EVs. And imagine a situation that I have a EV, and that EV I will get it charged, and let's say the electricity that I'm using is also coming from, let's say, solar powered plants. Then I am absolutely not creating any emissions, except if we ignore the mining aspects. The mining aspects of electric vehicles. Why mining? Because I will need some critical earth minerals, some rare earth minerals to manufacture my car and batteries. So mining naturally involves a lot of pollution. Now, what is the other part? Technology and job creation. So whenever I create a new industry, new types of job come up. Now, we have the third largest automobile sector in the world, and we also have the youngest workforce in a major economy, and we also have to capitalize on our demographic dividend. So can we do all of that together by creating the next big electric vehicle ecosystem of the world? And whenever India has done something, it has done it at a lower cost. Let's take the example of space. So we have cut the cost of space by a factor of 10. So if the EV transition becomes an EV revolution, then what happens? We can become the EV supplier of not only India but the world. And this goes in line with our vision of Make in India and Atmanirbhar Bharat. So we are looking at tech like energy storage, and this energy storage will also be used. So these are multi-use technologies. The same energy storage will also be used to create our grids, to utilize more of solar energy, right? Then savings. So over the period of time, what happens is, the more number of parts you have in a vehicle, there is more wear and tear. Therefore, complex machines also requires heavy maintenance, bigger maintenance budgets. On the other hand, they have few moving parts, so they are simple, lightweight, and they have better efficiencies. So savings on all those aspects. Now, what are the issues with EVs? So issues are pretty big. Let's say I want to buy a petrol vehicle. I can get the cheapest one, let's say at 5 or 7. But let's say I want to buy the cheapest and with the similar amount of comfort, then I may get it at 10 or 12 lakhs. So this is a huge price differential that we are looking at. This is a very big price differential, and someone will have to foot the bill. So there are two ways of doing it, whether to give incentives, rebates, tax holidays to corporates, or we can go for the DBTs, because we have the Aadhaar stacks, we have the infrastructure to, let's say, go for refund schemes, to go for more promotion of EVs. Let's take an example. Let's say I sign up for a website today, and that is a startup. That is a VC funded startup. So what do? They give me 500 off, they give me 100 rupee off, like that. So some joining bonuses, etc. So can I take up the initial cost so that a consumer like me who can afford a small car can directly transition to EV rather than to wait for 4 or 5 years so that the cost of EV comes down, or somehow we are able to find an alternative to lithium ion batteries. Then charging infrastructure. And this is about disparities. So if there is a digital divide in India, there is an economic divide in India, there will naturally be a charging divide. And so it is but natural that charging infrastructure will be better positioned in urban areas, and in rural areas the penetration will be at a lower scale and pace as well. Then range. Now there are so many doubts that are created about EVs. So one is, what will be the range? Second is whether or not, let's say I am traveling from Delhi to Jaisalmer. So if I get to know that I will have to go 20 kilometers extra to just get my vehicle charged, or let's say I get to know that there is no servicing whatsoever of electric vehicles in the way to Jaisalmer. Let's say I am traveling from Bikaner to Jaisalmer and everyone locally has told me that there is A, no charging infrastructure, B, there is no person who can service your car if anything goes down. So will I go to that range with an electric vehicle? Absolutely not. I'll not take the risk with my family. So range issues, then supply chain. Whenever any global geopolitical event happens, there is some war, strife, etc. The first thing that happens is nationalization or monopolization of resources. So more companies will be buying up mines. Then state-owned companies will be interfering. Countries will be trying to monopolize some supply chains. Take the example of China in rare earth minerals. So that is why we are going for partnerships like MSP, Mineral Security Partnership with US, because we want to achieve supply chain resilience, right? Then there is technology gaps. Let's say Tata today is making the best electric vehicles of India. But can we see that there is tech gap between Tata and Tesla? And while the world has promised us that there will be green transition and we'll help with finance and technology, but no company or no country will do away with their patents and their technology or their know-how. No country would like to share state-of-the-art technologies. And that is also a case of tech gaps. So what are the government policies? So there was FAME, now there is FAME 2. Then we have the PLI scheme for batteries, for EV components, for EV manufacturers. Then vehicle scrapping policy, so that we can scrap our old vehicles. The same scrap can be recycled. It can become part of the circular economy. And I can get some discount on my next purchase of a new car. Then building bylaws. Now, so Ministry of Urban Affairs, they will change the building bylaws so that there is more allocation of space to EV charging infrastructure right in your parking itself, so that people have a short supply of charging. Now, what is the way forward? So first, government should become the flag bearer. There are a lot of doubts and a lot of debates that whether or not to buy electric vehicle, whether or not it is sustainable, whether there are more malfunctions, because we had seen that there were some fires also in EVs. So government should become the flag bearer. So state governments, municipalities, national government, they should adopt all electric vehicles. So they will become a model for us citizens to follow suit, right? Because government uses a lot of vehicles, and we are only talking about the public functionaries, so they can become the flag bearers. Then the reduction of cost through incentives, whether to consumers or through corporates, but there has to be this differential has to be reduced. So whether through startups who are funded by VC plus government plus large scale orders. So let's say the government goes to place, let's say 1,000 car order, and earlier this company was manufacturing only 100 cars. So when the government places 1,000 car orders, what happens? So the cost of production will come down. Now the company may also invite people to place order, and they might also take, let's say, 1,000 orders from public, and then they can come out with a lower price, let's say 20% lower price, because they will get the scale of production. So if government support is there for our domestic manufacturers, then it will reduce the cost. Then we have to also foster competition. So we cannot isolate ourselves only to our conglomerates. We have to invite the international brands. We have to invite our startups. We have to go for the ecosystem approach, where despite of size, all the market participants who are in this industry are trying to innovate and disrupt to go for low cost manufacturing of electric vehicles. Then idea is to make in India electric vehicle components as well as batteries. Then affordable battery charging and affordable battery swapping. Battery swapping increases the range. If I can swap my battery simply and add another battery, then move for 400 kilometers, then there is another station where I can swap my battery, then I can do all India trips. So we need some on ground infrastructure. Then we have to go for MRO industry. So the maintenance, repair, overall industry of electric vehicle needs to be strengthened, and it has to be specially present. It cannot happen that the MRO industry is isolated only to Pune, Delhi, etc. So it should be spatially spread across India. Then the idea of mineral security. And we also discussed this example of mineral security partnership that we went with US. Right. Now, case study that is coming from Supreme Court. So we know that under Article 1242 and 2171, the judges of the high courts are higher courts. That includes your High Court and Supreme Court. They are appointed. Now, the idea was that it was happening to the President under his warrant and seal with consultation of the Chief Justice and such other judges. But over the period of time, through the 3 judges case, through SP Gupta, then Advocate on Record, and finally NJAC, what we have seen is that in India, the appointment happens through Collegium. And the biggest criticism of Collegium has been that it is unfair, it is a club system, it is a system which is absolutely not transparent, and what are the inner workings of Collegium is anyone's guess. But what our Chief Justice has done, he has now gone for some transparency mechanisms, and this can serve as a good case study of how internal reforms can also bring about institutional changes. Not all the reforms can come from outside pressure, but internal. So good processes makes good institutions. So what kind of processes? So Supreme Court is now adopting measures like going for more inclusive nature. So inclusive appointment. So whether it is about gender, which is about social aspects. So which region are you coming from, which caste you are coming from, to make Supreme Court and higher courts more representative, more inclusive. So there is more diversity, and with diversity comes more resilience. Second good criteria of selection of judges that they have taken up is the quality of judgment. So now the idea is that there will be a committee which will be looking at the quality of judgment of these judges, and most importantly, integrity. So while earlier seniority was given the most important weightage, now other aspects like inclusiveness, like quality of judgment and integrity are also coming up in discussions. And that is why this is a good case study of how internal reforms is also making the Collegium more transparent, which has been tarnished by keywords like non-transparent and club system. So this is a good case study. Then one important prelim pointer that can directly be asked in a question is that what do I mean by nomadic elephant? So nomadic elephant is a war exercise between India and Mongolia. So, and this will be happening in Ulaanbaatar, right? That's it from my side. All the very best.